And now, Ayah Bdeir, Senior Advisor, Mozilla. Roberta Braga, Founder and Executive Director, Digital Democracy Institute of the Americas. Mona Hamdy, Chief Advisor, AI Ethics, aiXplain, and Founder, Anomaly. And Moderator, Daanish Masood Alavi, Independent Advisor, Frontier AI Alignment.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real exactly. Real pleasure to be here. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of you for being here. So we're gonna dive right in, and just to set the scene. We're in a situation where 3.1 billion people have access to mobile broadband but don't use it, right? The number of women that work in AI, like in the AI workforce, is 22%. And in the Global South, it's just 15%. Less than 2% of investment goes to the Global South in general. When it comes to the African continent, 17% of the global population lives there, but the amount of AI investment and the number of data centers there is pitifully low. So that's kind of like, the global situation when we're talking about AI. We have an extraordinary panel here of, Ayah Bdeir, who's an advisor with Mozilla, a leader in the open source AI community. Roberta Braga, who's the executive director of the Digital Democracy Institute of America. I'm saying this again in case you guys missed it when we were introduced. Roberta is someone who looks at the information ecosystem for minority communities and the Latinx community in particular. And of course, Mona Hamdy, who's a tech ethicist, an advisor to aiXplain, and someone who looks at life, death, and tech, and also a teaching fellow at Harvard. So to jump right in, since we've heard a lot of doom and gloom about what's going on with AI and some of the challenges there, especially as we're seeing more and more centralization with the superscalers and the large model builders, et cetera, I wanted to ask our panelists, starting with Ayah and moving toward me, what's one headline that you've seen in the last year that you wish we could retire? And when it comes to technology and AI, and what's one headline that you wish we did see in the next year? Ayah.
One headline I wish we could retire is, can AI replace doctors? I think that one particularly upsets me a lot because if anything, we want AI to do all the legwork and the tedious work so that we could spend more time with doctors, so that when you go to a doctor, they could look at you in the eye and kind of give you the care that you need. So I think that really upsets me. An AI that I wish I saw more in the headlines was how much promise and potential is in open source AI to solve a lot of the issues that many people are concerned about in terms of bias, inequity, in terms of opacity, in terms of unequal access, and all of that stuff. And I think we'll talk about some of that.
That's all the headlines.
That's all the headlines. Sorry. I'm not leaving any for the rest of my panelists.
So from my perspective, the headline I'd retire is that minority communities are more, quote unquote, susceptible to harms on the internet. And I'll talk about why I don't believe that to be the case. The short of it is, so we spend a lot of time talking to Latinos in public opinion research and such, and people are actually pretty critical thinkers, and they're just trying to make the best of the polluted internet. And so they're thoughtful, even if incapable of sifting through all of that. And the headline that I would like to see, I don't know if you all are familiar with More in Common's research, but there's a lot more that we have in common across political parties and such than tears us apart. And I think that the perception on social media is that we are very, very far apart. And the most sensationalistic things get kind of brought up to the surface. And I would love for us to kind of get past that into some nuance. It won't make headlines necessarily, but I think that there's something there. So.
Oof, the headline I want to see retired is, it's sentient, I swear. Probably. No, it's a god.
Last one.
Yeah, thanks. The headline I want to see is, world develops global, unbiased, impartial benchmark standard for language models.
Interesting.
Plus one.
To be published on Wired magazine.
To be published on to be open sourced and distributed to every human being on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about a lot of these problems, and we're going to be diving deep. But before we did that, since a lot of this is, a lot of these conversations tend to take this sort of general atmosphere or vibe of like bad news bears, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the silver linings that you're seeing? What are some silver linings? Maybe I'll start with Roberta.
Sure. So we spend a lot of time researching misinformation, extremism, hate online. The silver lining for me is that, one, people are not believing everything they see. They are actually really uncertain and skeptical, and that's good and bad. But I think we have the capacity to push it toward more of the good and less of the bad. The other is all interventions that we see in the world, like fact-checking, correcting the record before someone sees something online, media literacy, digital, like all of it actually works. So it's not the case that we need to like invest only in this and not at all in this. We need to invest in all of it, and we need to do more targeting. So I think we just need to understand for which people do those interventions work best. Because, so in our case, for example, a person that believes 1 in 14 conspiracy theories or false narratives, for them a fact check will work really well. But for a person that believes 13 of the 14, that's not the solution or set of solutions. And so for them, they might need depolarization or something else.
A hug.
Yeah. To make new friends on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Nice. Ayah?
I think the silver lining is a lot of the entrepreneurs, inventors, and kind of like communities around the world that are like inventing their own versions of AI, that are creating their own solutions for local problems, that are not trying to replicate and kind of copy what they're seeing in the West, but they're trying to use the technology to solve things on their own. I guess I could think of another headline that I would love to see more of, which is AI is not necessarily happening to us. It's a moment where you could really participate in very small ways and actually have a very big impact, because we're in this state of like an open field, so many different opportunities, and people want solutions across all different industries. And so whatever it is, your interest or expertise or something that you're obsessed about, it's worth it for you to start engaging, which is why things like Solve are really important, because you see people that are finding solutions and across climate or across languages or across health and various things, and they all are worth funding, testing, prototyping, combining, collaborating. And if you create this community that is open to sharing with each other, I think we're going to see incredible results from it.
Can you tell me about an example that inspires you of a local community that's making AI their own?
I'm currently really excited about AI for local languages. So the panel earlier today with a lot of the inventions was really, I relate to very deeply. About a year and a half ago, I was inviting a bunch of friends for an iftar dinner, for Ramadan iftar, and I wanted to make a poster to send to people for the invitation. And I remember like telling Dali at the time, give me a picture of a table from the top down. I want tabbouleh, I want hummus, I want fatteh, I want this and that. I proceeded to spend like 6 or 7 hours, because I'm obsessive, trying to get the thing right, and I could not get it right. And somehow it launched me into this rabbit hole of looking at all the different data sets, how they're trained, where they're getting the data from.
The Lebanese take their hummus so serious.
Yeah, oh my God.
I am
You're joking, but that is what offended me most. Yes,
I was so serious.
So offended by the picture of the hummus. But it basically...
localization.
But so basically it launched me on this kind of like mini obsession, I would say, about how we should really enable more of these small, customized, fine-tuned local models that are really representing communities, that are representing languages and dialects, that people don't need giant data centers to run and things like that. And I think that's something that that Muna also is that her and I were talking about in the back.
I think it's really important. I think it points to a few things. I think we've heard open source a lot. That's one of the outcroppings of that, is that, and I tend to think of those systems as I look at things in terms of biomimicry a lot. So I think that those are extensions of living systems. They're nested, they're iterative, they're percussive, they're pluralistic. So it points to a world where, and this is one of the silver linings, I think, first of all, it has humans questioning our tech when we say, is it sentient, to be a little less tongue-in-cheek, or what's its purpose? We're asking, why would there be one language model to rule them all? Why shouldn't there be one that's super custom, that I use for a very specialized purpose, that has a very specialized relevance to me? And that, to my mind, is probably the most viable future, right? And it also means that everyone has a unique value and a unique contribution, and so do these data sets, which I think will be valued for difference, and not match. So that's really special, because that's sort of an extension of what cultures and communities are. That's what our living systems are. That's what gives us meaning and identity and purpose, to my mind. And the greatest silver lining is that because we're asking that of our tech systems, we're asking that of ourselves. So I love that it's causing us to be more thoughtful and more deliberate, maybe, I hope, about our human systems, because we have to build their analogs. Well, they're digital analogs in our non-analog world, right, to extend our communities that way. And then that points to the fact that we should all probably, and this is maybe the headline I want to stop seeing too, we will be more engineering-minded and not less, right? So I don't think that the world is going to run out of needing engineers. I think every one of us will be a little bit more engineering in our lives, and I think that's kind of a great thing when you get to be a little bit more deliberate.
Amazing. Mona, aside from being the resident comedian on our panel, is also a philosopher of technology, which is, thank you for that. Yeah. You've focused a lot on open source, right? And can you speak to the importance of that, and why? I'd like, if at all possible, for you to connect that to what more open source resources, for building AI would mean for the rest of the world.
So open source, for those who don't know, it is this sort of ideology and way of working where technology is built in the open, where code is shared, where people build together and collaborate across long distances. It's been something, a vector that's been very successful in open source software. A lot of the systems that we have today, browsers, operating systems, AI, in fact, itself was really born out of the open source movement. And then a lot of big tech companies started closing AI, particularly when Gen AI started becoming kind of prominent. Closing AI.
Benefited from it too.
After having benefited gigantically from it, started closing it and making it less accessible to other people, which means researchers can't get access to it. People with less means can get access to it. You can't understand how the systems work on the inside. And I've been involved in open source for a very long time. I was involved about 15 years ago in the open source hardware movement, which is this movement that asks itself, how can you build hardware, physical things, in a way that is open source, where it's not zero cost to replicate something, it's not zero cost to distribute something, but you still want to benefit from this community, participatory driven approach. And we, from a group of 15 people, worked on developing a community that now is hundreds of thousands of people strong and have a license that they use at CERN, and it's become a really kind of big movement. We recently at Mozilla did the same thing with open source AI. So I led a series of convenings around bringing people who believe in open source and AI together that wanted to say, what does open source mean for AI? Does the model have to be open source? Does it mean that you have to have access to the code itself? Does it mean that you have to have access to the data sets? And more this community has been working together to say, this is the way that we counter some of the negative effects of this sort of like overlord feeling that we get from AI, where we don't understand how it's producing the answers it's producing, we don't understand whose data is in it, we don't understand who is benefiting from it. With open source, you can actually say, this is the training data set, this is the way the code has been written, this is these are the weights that have been, that come out of the training, and you can really start to like see transparently through this technology, which makes it less scary, more accessible, and really more able to be kind of something that you participate in and improve over time.
Nice. You're based in the Middle East, right? And so what do you I mean when you hear Ayah say these things about open source, how do you think these types of open source models and advances in open source AI would benefit places like Egypt and elsewhere and other places in Africa, other countries?
Or just any place, so that we don't put a sort of just about asymmetric access. Like you can even be in the global north. I hate using those terms, just want to throw that out there, and not have the resources or compute to have something that's, large scale and proprietary. I think that it's inevitable, and I think that it's probably the way for, resource inadequate geographies would be able to compete. What I do think is really hard, and I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that saying open source, which is the refrain of today, we know that it will ultimately lead to a more secure network, right? And to a more secure network of LLMs and a more secure network of different kinds of AI. You guys, have you ever been a founder and tried to tell your board and your shareholders that you want to just make anything open source? It's not easy. Open source and shareholder value and national security are diametrically opposed. There's a lot of friction there. So what do I think has to happen? And this is not outside of the Arab world or the Middle East, but writ large, this is the conversation in Boston, is that we have to fundamentally re-examine where value is derived. And I think that is the most promising future of what open source is that it fundamentally forces you to re-examine where you derive value from, right?
And who benefits.
And who benefits, which is the point of those unique, so in that way, that's cool.
Yeah.
Big fan of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So far we've talked a lot about kind of the supply side, right? Of who's making the models, how are they making them, are they open source, are they not? I want to switch. I want to switch a little bit to the demand side, and what I like to call the ethology of AI and the ethology of information ecosystems, and turn to Roberta, and really kind of go a little bit deeper about to talk about how is the rollout of all these systems affecting Latinx communities in your work?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, our mission at DDIA is really to build and strengthen trust between communities and democracy and technology. And we do that work through a lot of listening research, so public opinion research, polls, focus groups, interviews. And both last year and this year, we talked to Latinos in the United States about AI and their experiences with AI. So last year in March and then again in September, we tried to set a foundation of understanding how much are people actually using the different types of tools that were out there, and then what did they think about, they trust it, do they not, do they think it should be regulated, do they not, what is the impact of that on elections, what is the impact of that on the job market, all of these things. And so some of what we heard from folks. In March, only about 15% of the 3,000 people we polled were using AI, and what they were using was ChatGPT. It was even lower for some of the other tools. In September, that was 20%. People really were concerned about the impact of AI on the job market, and it was upwards of something like over 68% of people thought that AI would take jobs away from regular people like them. And then right around the same amount, 69%, I think, thought that it was really urgent to regulate AI immediately. I think there were silver linings of that. For the people that used AI systems, they had a more positive outlook on it. And people, again, are thoughtful. They didn't think that AI systems were inherently good or bad. They saw them mostly as neutral, but they understood that they could be used for good or bad things. Now, this year, we did some more qualitative studies. So we talked to people, had interviews with them, 14-hour-long interviews. And we again asked them about AI. And what folks told us is, one, they are seeing AI-generated content a lot more. But just like all of us in this room, our attention's sort of divided between passively scrolling on our phones and actively searching for things that we might come across when we passively scroll through our phones. And what people told us was that they don't love seeing AI-generated content on their feeds, that they thought it was inorganic and inauthentic and polluty, and they could tell it wasn't really real. They weren't really sure, but they thought they were seeing more AI-generated content than before. They just could tell there was a vibe. They know the images are off, or this is too perfect, or the voices don't match. But when they were doing active search, they did rely on AI-generated content, so the AI summaries specifically, and ChatGPT and some of the bots on the platforms like Grok. they're using those to do search and to verify information. And so there was a perception that not only does it make their search lives easier, it also has less bias because a bot does not have a perspective like, say, a news outlet might or a person might. So there's a little bit of that. And I think people are, so it's changing quickly, but people are aware of some of the changes.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Minna, do you want to come in?
It's a hellscape.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. I think 2 points of your research are really fascinating to me. That was one, I think, because that's clear uncanny valley stuff. Like, we don't like looking at, you've seen it, right? And it's a lot. The search thing is we've got to come up with a solution for that, because that's a market play. That's a product being pushed on you for commercial interest, and it's wrong. So it's creating, we live in a post-truth? We live in a world of truthiness now, and that's just like on steroids. So that's dangerous. We have to come up with something better than that, and you have to use something that is not a generative pre-trained transformer to just sort of mix bag your truth. That's really super duper dangerous. The other thing in your research that I find really provocative is about the youth skew. So, and I think we have to talk about that just in terms of inherent dangers to what's happening to our community. We don't want to end up in that, what was the movie, Idiocracy, right? Which is what's going to happen if your search is lying and just literally making it up for money. Like, we can't, that's 2025. We can do something way cooler with this tech. It's amazing. Not that, that's bad. So these youth are living in a world where things are right and wrong and true and false and real and not real. And so you see it, right? We see it on college campuses around the world. You see these not wanting to be labeled, cynical, questioning everything. And yet, I've had the honor of working with a lot of families who call themselves angel parents because their children have suffered grievous harm because of our inability to really control and regulate and discuss what we're doing with our tech, because we haven't had these thoughtful conversations. And it shows me that youth are uniquely susceptible to this, to that unique conforming that model wraps around you. We've talked about sycophancy a lot. We've seen models roll some of that back, and I think your research basically is proving that. Is that right?
There's a huge gap in age when we talk about susceptibility. Like, writ large, everybody's very uncertain. I mentioned that it was something like 62% of the people, and then 66% from March and September that I mentioned. But when it came, we usually assume the stereotype is that older folks, our grandparents or our parents, are the ones that can't really tell truth from falsehood online. And what we found was actually that the youth were some of the people that were a little more susceptible. And that's like, they are just surrounded by it all the time. So there are some things there, like we weren't sure, for example, like the older folks, they were more accurate in labeling headlines as true or false. They were also more certain when they did it. So we couldn't tell if it's because of wisdom or lived experience that they felt like they needed to have an answer when they were asked. Right. Whereas the younger folks between the ages of 18 and 25 were more comfortable saying they weren't sure. So I think there's a lot more we want to dig into. For what it's worth, when we did ask people if they thought that AI content should be labeled, almost everybody said yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
And they wanted it to prevent confusion. So I think people are really tired and they don't know what to do. So
is that interesting that I don't know?
I'm being told that we have to draw the pen to a close soon.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask one last question really quick before we end, which is, I'll start with Ayah and go back toward me.
Why am I always the first one?
Well, because you're in my direct line of sight.
Yeah, bring it.
And so if there's a certain set of issues that you each focus on. If each of you were given $50 million today to focus on that particular issue, what would you start with? And in a minute or less from each of you, because we
$50 million a minute or less.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm now really interested in embodied AI, which is physical manifestations of AI. So now everybody's heard that OpenAI and Johnny Ive have teamed up together to do the iPhone of AI. And obviously Facebook Meta's doing the Ray-Bans, and there are all these other devices that are happening. And so I'm really interested in what is going to be the open source version of that. Are we really going to allow a lot of these big tech companies to put their devices in our rooms, in our beds, in our living rooms, and watch everything we do all day, every day, more than it's already happening? Or are we going to, if we needed to have some of those solutions, create our own version of it that we control, that is local, that is basically really closed off to spaces, They said, don't do that. Spaces that we have control over, and I'm much more interested in the latter solution.
Super interesting. Roberta?
So our work is people-centered. My answer is people-centered. I would invest in massive civics education from like a very young age. I grew up in northern Wisconsin. I'm originally from Brazil, but I grew up in northern Wisconsin. The civics class was an optional elective, and you only did it for one semester. So it's just like, I don't think people are getting the civics education they need. The other thing is journalism. I think journalism classes, everybody, whether you're in journalism school or not, should take a lot of journalism classes, because we are all like producers of content now, and I think the ethics and the writing and the verification of content, all of the things you learn in journalism school, you should learn earlier in life.
Mona, 50 million. What are you going to do?
$50 million. I would up the Solve Prize to have to scale the geniuses required to make a benchmarking standard that allowed for maximum security and that allowed humans and agents to figure out a way to work together collaboratively and make that an enforceable and governed protocol.
You are already kind of working in that area, aside from the software.
Yeah, no, I am, because I believe in that big time. I think that it would be naive to say that we're not heading in that direction, and I think that we can do it in a way that makes all 8 and then 10 billion of us count. The technology can do it. It's not about constraining the tech. It's about constraining the interests that surround the tech. And I don't know if any one of us can do it, or if any 3 or any 5 humans should own that. I'm just saying. But I think that all 8 billion of us could. So I would give it to MIT and to Solve to help me figure that out.
Yeah. Nice. All right, friends, can we please join me in thanking our panelists? Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, okay. All right.